Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, not least because actually when I had just started the company, I came to MoneyWired a few years ago, and now MoneyWired has me as a speaker, which is super exciting. And I think it's very representative of what RegTech also stands about, because when we started the company, it was not really a sector, but now we really have a sector with two other speakers that are going to come on. And that's something that's very, very exciting for us as a company. So I wanted to tell you a bit about Suede and what we've been doing and what we do from a technology perspective. But also the reality for us is that we've been on a very big journey from an entrepreneurship and an entrepreneurial perspective as well around what really is needed for our industry. So I'm going to speak to you about FIRE, which is Financial Regulatory Data Format, which is an open source project that we've been working on that has been very successful, but also really represents what we stand for as a company and our technology. So when we started the company, we asked ourselves the question, how do we prevent the next financial crisis? And if you are a RegTech, you should be asking yourself that for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if not more often during the day. And the only way forward is regulation, right? And I think that that's something that's really been about embracing regulation, and it's something that has really resonated for our clients and for the industry. But it's not just about regulation, it's also about regulation that can be really adopted from a technology perspective. And then what was very exciting for us to realize is that really, what is the thing that all banks have in common? What is the thing that people are actually ready to share in order to compete better? And that is actually regulatory data. So very quickly in our journey, we realized that data was a huge problem for the industry and that something needed to be done about it. So I'm hoping you guys are familiar with how the legacy systems kind of used to look pre-crisis. When you think about the flow of data, it was very one-dimensional. So the data would really go from one system to the other because the regulation was not really asking that from them. And really the regulation, if you think about it, was an afterthought. It was not something that was really ingrained in the culture of how you do technology in a bank or in financial systems. Post-crisis, so every time the rules have changed, what has also happened to the data is that it has become more and more corrupt. And a lot of things have surfaced in terms of the problems and the problematics of this data flowing from one system to the other, from one department to the other, and how impossible that actually is to cope with. So we really wanted to design technology that would be in line of the future of banking, right? And so what that means is really thinking about an architecture that puts the regulation at the very core of it. And this is where we've been making a difference, because effectively our platform is about tools that allow our clients to redesign their architecture where you put the regulation and the regulator at the center of it. So we always speak about how we bridge the regulatory gap through modern technology, and the reason we can do this through modern technology is because of the discipline we have around data. And then it's not just about what it means for a bank or a financial institution to redesign from an architectural perspective. It's also about what that data does further on. What is it for the industry? Where does this data go? It goes to other financial institutions. It goes to the regulators. And then the data that goes to the regulators goes to other regulators. And you can see very quickly how you end up in this matrix of very complex data that has to be transferred from one place to the other. And in the way that the system is right now, the flexibility for this data to actually travel from one place to the other is actually it's not really happening, right? And so where is the systemic risk here? Where is there a possibility for sensitivity and for another hacker to go into the system and do things with this data? So right now, the lack of visibility about this whole financial data world that we're talking about is quite flagrant. And then what you have to think about when you're a RegTech, you really have to understand what the trends in regulation are all about. So you're talking about big data. Everyone talks about big data all the time, right? What does that actually mean in regulation? What it means is that you're going from the big data to the small data the regulator actually wants to see. The other thing is that you need to be able to cope with change. So if you remember that graph that that diagram with all the arrows going everywhere, what has happened to the data is that it becomes more and more corrupt as the regulation has changed. So when you're building RegTech, you really need to be able to build systems that can cope with the frequency of change. Because change is the new normal. Regulation is not going to pause for the well-being of the whole industry. It's actually going to continue changing in order to prevent another financial crisis. So you need to be able to cope with that change. Then cost. The cost of this corrupt data in the industry is humongous. And the problem for the financial industry is that this is actually a cost that could be diminished quite dramatically if people became a lot more disciplined around their data. And finally, it is about transparency, not just transparency for the regulators, but also inside the banks. When you think about this cost and the problems in transparency, is that a lot of decisions are being made with very little information inside a financial system without really understanding what the granular data really is all about. And so what that means is that you end up with bad decisions. And fundamentally, the banks themselves want more transparency internally so that they can make better decisions. But also, consumers are more and more expecting that from their financial services because of everything that happened during the crisis. So what does the industry need? So we ask ourselves a lot of questions this way because we want to make sure that we're actually doing the right thing. So we were thinking, what do we actually need to improve this communication of data to go from one place to the other? What do we do to go and move away from this diagram with all these arrows everywhere to the actual clean architecture that we're trying to get for the financial industry? And that is standards. Right? And people speak about standards all the time. There's a lot of conversations around standards. But something actually needs to be done. So we decided to take action. And as a good technology company does, we asked ourselves, what would Google do? And that's a good thing to ask yourself when you're actually building technology, because Google does a lot of stuff. They do a lot of cool stuff. And so what would Google do if they had to face the tremendous burden of financial data that we had to face? And so what's interesting with Google is that they deal with a lot of data. They do that all the time. They're experts at it. And they've done it in a lot of different industries. And so when you think about transport specifically, they've actually thought about regulating transport data, and they did that with standards. So when you think about your Google app, your Google map effectively telling you how long it takes you to go from one place to the other, telling you what is the fastest route, it is a reality that all of this is actually based on standards. And this is a project that actually came in 2006. And what's really exciting is that when you think about why now we can actually do all of these other applications on top of it, is because every single major transport authority has come together to actually release their information and their bus schedules in that standard. And it's made Google Maps possible, but it's also made all this other innovation possible. So what we need to remember fundamentally is that data standards make software possible. Data standards make innovation possible, and that's why it's so important to look at them. And so one thing that I wanted to say is that Google Maps itself actually leveraged on standards as well, right? So everything that is technology-driven is based on standards. So from JavaScript to HTML to the internet to CSV, the internet that we take so much for granted is filled with standards. So we're surrounded by standards everywhere. And the reason this is very important is because when you think about developers, so in fintech, people always ask for dummy data from the financial industry in order to build certain applications. The problem with dummy data is that that's not very efficient. Right? Because if you're an innovator, you're still building something with dummy data, it's not going to be the same from one bank to the other, let alone for a system inside a bank. It can completely vary between one system to the other. So the solution here is obviously to look at financial standards. And in finance, it's very interesting because why are we so scared about doing regulatory financial data standards? Because in finance, we have done standards, right? So we've done this in the past. We're actually okay at doing them, but there's not enough. And every time there's been a leap in the way that data has been transferred in the financial industry, it's been done through standards. From SWIFT to electronic trading with FIX to derivatives with FPML, the era of derivatives was made possible thanks to FPML. And now we are in the RegTech era. And that's the thing that's really exciting, because I know we spoke about regulation in a bit of a boring way, but I was telling Tom that we will make it sexy. And it's the hot stuff, and RegTech is definitely a hot topic across the industry. And Jeremy, I'm counting on you to make it even more sexy. But effectively, what's really exciting is that you cannot continue just talking about the standards. We're in the regulatory era, we need standards for regulation. So because we don't have to go through a million committees, and because we are innovators and we can just go and do it, we were able to just start. And we took a step back and really wanted to think about what is a good standard? What is it all about? So a good standard is built on other standards. This is not about reinventing the wheel. It is about making the wheel more efficient and faster. So if there's something out there that already exists that makes sense from ISO to the regulators, we're going to reuse it. It's not about just starting from scratch. A good standard is not a competitive advantage. If you think about HTML, it's not about how you build your website. It's about what your website actually has as a content. And so what better to start for data standards in the financial industry than regulation? This bit that actually everyone has in common. It has to be simple. It cannot be gibberish. If you're a developer that has never been in a bank or in a financial institution, you should be able to play with it. So our format is plain text JSON. It is not a database model. You should be completely free about the way you store your data. The way you store your data is completely independent about the way your data is transferred. And it has to have a clear purpose. From our perspective, if the regulator doesn't want it, we don't look at it. And so this clear purpose is something that has really allowed us to drive in a purpose for the regulation that we're trying to do. And what's really exciting as well is that it is about democratizing our own expertise that we have from the industry so that we can share that to the community and have more and more innovation in this space. So our standards make Suede possible, and they make our technology possible, but it's also about making more innovation possible for the whole industry. So it's a proper open source project. It was sponsored by the European Commission, the Open Data Institute. These guys, you know, they're part of all this conversation around the open banking group, APIs, and all of the good stuff that people are trying to do around more openness for the financial industry. Why were they so interested in looking at what we were doing in that space? And the reason is that if you think about data that you're trying to share for the industry, that you're trying to like open for consumers, data that already leaves the financial industry to be shared across the industry because it goes to the regulators makes a lot of sense. And so that's why we had their support. It's a proper open source, you know, license. Everyone can play with this. The FIRE objectives. So we wanted to improve regulatory data, right? Because it allowed us to build technology that would really improve quality control and governance for the financial institution. So when we were thinking about this heat map that could do more and that could give you a real sense of where there could be a potential hack or where your data could be traveling, there is a reality that if you get to granular data understanding of how your whole system works, you actually can get there. Before it was a dream, now you can actually really look at the data protocol and how your data is transferring from one part of the industry to the other. Comparability in supervision. So this is also for regulators. If you think about it, how are they supposed to supervise efficiently? How are they supposed to prevent another financial crisis if they cannot compare from one bank to the other? The moment they start drilling through and trying to understand underlyingly what data is inside a particular institution, it's a very difficult thing to do if the data is completely different from one institution to the other. And then you're also thinking about this seamless integration for fintechs and third parties. So there is a reality that, you know, when you think about the way that apps interact with each other, the financial industry really should get there because the transfer of data is so primordial to the way that we do business. Fundamentally, this is all about making life better and more transparent and stable and cheaper for consumers, right? And this is where all of this regulatory movement and this RegTech movement has really been driven. It has been driven by the fact that the regulators are trying to make sure that we don't get into the kind of systemic risk that we found in the past and are trying to make sure that this also becomes a cheaper system for our consumers. So people can contribute. If you are a developer, you can go to our GitHub repository. And if you're in legal kind of institutions, consultants, bankers, please contribute in the documentation. And so effectively, what we believe fundamentally is that good standards become adopted because they're simply good. I don't think Google was going around asking Uber to use their standards. They actually just made sense. And so from our perspective, the more people are part of this revolution, the better it is for actually starting a movement of better regulatory financial standards for the whole industry. So I wanted to leave you with this thought. For us, what's been really exciting at Suede is that we've been able to demonstrate that with passion and knowing what you're doing, a group of people can really innovate in an agile way for the whole industry. Because FIRE has been so much more than just about our company. It's been about the way that we've been able to push the boundary with our technology, to push a lot of these conversations about what's actually possible in technology for the financial industry. And so wherever you are, I think that what's really exciting when it comes to innovation and what it's possible to actually achieve, just join the revolution. Right? I think that a few years ago when I was in my institution and I was trying to think of what I could do with my life that could actually change things, there is a reality that in RegTech, there's a lot of innovation that's really up for grabs. And where we need more intel and more understanding from the industry to actually really create the innovation that's necessary for Regulation 2020. So I would usually leave with just do it, but we have to invent our own version. So we said, get involved, be bold, and play with fire. And that's hot stuff. So thank you, guys.